Well, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see everybody here again for another edition of Islington Reads. And tonight we're welcoming Louise Michalos, who wrote the book Marilla Before Anne. Louise was born in the eastern shore of Nova Scotia and was raised in Halifax, and brings an authentic voice to Marilla Cuthbert's story. The second youngest in a family of 9, Louise's life was infused with stories of love, loss, and family secrets that are held within small communities throughout Atlantic Canada. After a 40-year career in retail banking, human resource management, and program administration with the provincial government, what started as a great retirement hobby turned into a published novel. While doing her research, Louise came across this quote by Margaret Atwood in her book Moving Targets, Writing with Intent, 1982 to 2004. It is only in the course of the book that we realize there is a strong family resemblance between the two. Matthew, as we have always known, is a kindred spirit for Anne, but the kinship with Marilla goes deeper. Marilla, too, has been odd, ugly, unloved. She, too, has been the victim of fate and justice. It may be the ludicrous escapades of Anne that render the book so attractive to children, but it is the struggle of Marilla that give it resonance for adults. And that's when the story of Marilla Cuthbert came to life. So I thought I would turn it over to Louise now, and have her talk a little bit about the process of writing and some of the factors that made her decide to write about Marilla. And then we'll move over to questions. We have quite a few questions, actually, some great questions. And if there is time at the end, we'll open it up to the audience. And just to note that afterwards, any of the people in the audience who want to stay on for a small group discussion, just leave your Zoom link open. Louise.
Okay, well, thank you. Can you all see me? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So it is so wonderful to be here, and just thank you all so much. Choosing my book just means so much to me. I mean, I'm a brand new author, so it's such a thrill. And this story is so special to me because as an author, the idea is that the characters choose you. So it's like Marilla tapped me on the shoulder and said, someone has to tell this story. And I felt like I have a responsibility to her to get that story out and in people's hands. That's how it feels to me. So when Anne read that quote, I was doing my research, trying to find out more information about Marilla's backstory. And really there wasn't much at all. And when I read that quote, it was instant. I said, oh my God, she's her grandmother. She's her grandmother. And I knew the beginning, I knew the end, and then I just had to fill in the rest of it. And I just followed the characters through that story to get it finished. So yeah, that's how it came about. Why I chose Marilla is because I'm a new author. Like, nobody knows me. I'm not a well-known person. I live in Bedford, Nova Scotia, and I'm going to be submitting my manuscript to what I consider regional publishers. I'm not sending it up to Ontario or anywhere else. I'm just sending it to publishers here. So I thought, well, they don't know me. It might be helpful if they knew the character. I had attended a workshop during my, learning to write phase. And one of the ideas they had was to take a story that's familiar, take a character out of that story and tell their story. And I love that concept. There's a few other stories I'd like to do that too, but that's where I got it. And I thought, okay, well, East Coast, I mean, Anne of Green Gables, everyone knows that. It's, everyone knows it across Canada now and also in the States now. So I'm going to talk about Marilla, and that's when I started the research, and that's when I found the quote, and that's when it all came together. And when I'm writing, I'm a fairly disciplined writer. I write every day. And so I had that novel, I call it 40 chapters in 40 weeks. I wrote a chapter a week, and then it was done. And so, and I submitted it, and I know the publisher, not knowing me, at least is willing to take a chance on the subject. So you know, I'm old enough and I've been in business long enough to know that every business is a business, and even the publishing business is a business. So they want to be able to sell books. The bookstores want to be able to carry them. And I feel like a little cog as part of that big wheel of the publishing world. So yeah, they were interested because of the topic of Marilla. And some people ask me, and it has been asked of me, did I have to get permission from Ellen Montgomery Inc.? They're the heirs of Lucy Maud Montgomery. And I didn't, in fact, need to get the permission, but I didn't know that. Again, I'm a newbie. I want to do everything right. So I wrote to them. Her granddaughter's name, excuse me for a second. The granddaughter's name is Kate McDonald Butler. So I wrote to Kate McDonald Butler, email, and told her what I want to do. I had this project, and I was writing to ask permission to use the character of Marilla in my story, fictional story, but want to use the character of Marilla. And they explained that they really, I didn't need the permission, that because Marilla as a character belongs within the Canadian domain or something like that, that anybody can pick up the character of Marilla and write a story about her. What they asked me to do was maintain her character so that she's Marilla, the character. Meaning, don't turn her into a bank robber, don't turn her into a prostitute, that wouldn't be the Marilla we know and love. So I had to keep the character of Marilla intact. And I did that. I just simply told her story. And so, yeah, that also was an interesting point for me, is knowing that anybody can take a character that does exist and write an alternate story. So now I got some notes here. I'm the youngest now of, 9 people of a large family. And my oldest sister and my older brothers, they lived in the small community of Owl's Head, which is on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. I was brought into town as a 1-year-old baby, so I grew up in Halifax, but they lived in those communities. So growing up, even in the city, I kept hearing all these conversations, and it just filters its way in somewhere in the DNA. So the clothesline scene, I heard my mother talk about the clothesline, and you had to have your clothes out by a certain time in the morning in the country, the women, and the post office scenes, that's right out of my father's parents lived in a house where the post office was set up in the front parlor. And my mother, when she first got married and moved there, would get up to go for breakfast, and here's people lining up in the kitchen, sitting on chairs down the hall, waiting for the mailman to come. So I wasn't there, obviously, but all of those stories stayed with me, and I was able to include them in my story. The other piece that's really interesting for me, it may be for you as well, my father's mother, so my grandmother, was born in 1890. She was born in 1894. And at the age of 16, she had my father. So in 1910, she sat down as this young woman and signed over my father to the people who raised him in Owl's Head. She at that time was described as an unmarried, poor woman, unable to care for her child, and she signed him over. And we have that document in our family. Actually, it's kept at a museum on the Eastern Shore. And I took the wording that was from that original document back in 1910, and that's the document that it was used in the adoption scene where Marilla's signing away the baby to that couple. So again, it's fiction, but there's a lot of things that authors do pull from their lives. And I'll just say, cut me off if I'm talking too much. One of the other things that really resonated for me is the fact of bringing her granddaughter home. Both of my sons have lived out west now for over 25 years. And I say as an adult, as a mother, I've spent many, many years kind of waiting for my boys to come home. And some of you must know what that's like. We all have children living all across the country. And it took me a long time to realize that they're already home. They're in a place they've made home. But then when my grandson was born, Jack, I mean, this longing to bring him here and have him part of his roots. And the red hair, if you go to my website, you'll see the red hair. He could have been Anne's brother. He looks so much like, he has the red hair, and his roots are here in Nova Scotia. So in the scene where she says, you know, when they get to bring Anne home, when I say that, I can still feel that in me, because that's what it feels like for me as a grandmother. And I thought, anybody out there who's a grandmother, and maybe even the women in Japan who read this when they were younger women, now as a grandmother would appreciate this side of the story, or that's my hope. So I hope all of you as grandmothers can hear that. So I think really, Maya, I don't think there's really much else that I can add about the book. I think maybe answering some questions might.
I think Anne's got a whole bunch, so.
I'm going to unmute myself because we do have a lot of questions to get through.
Okay. So I'll answer the questions.
I had to whip out for 1 second because I got a phone call, and I'm expecting an important phone call tonight. But so if I ask you anything that you've already answered, please excuse me.
Okay.
What motivated you to write a prequel to such a famous series? Who encouraged you along the way?
Really, and why I was chosen to write this book, I don't know, but that's what it feels like. I was chosen to write it, and I was saying, like, who am I to write this? This is an important thing to write. This is Marilla's story, and there's so many more authors in Nova Scotia that are so much more experienced. They've written books before, and here I am jumping in, and I'm just going to write this prequel to the Anne of Green Gables. I questioned myself going through it the whole time, but I eventually got the idea that it was my responsibility as the author to tell the story, and so I just did it, as opposed to being really scared to death, thinking, "Who the heck am I to do this?" Right? And no one really encouraged me to do it in particular, but I certainly had encouragement to write. I mean, I had, I have 4 sisters, and one of them is one of my readers. And so I would call her all the time and say, "I finished chapter 28, will you listen?" And so they always encouraged me, for sure.
Was the publisher eager to publish the book?
They were. It's interesting. In 2018, I attended here on the Eastern Shore. Sherbrooke Village is a restored old village on the Eastern Shore. And there was a writer's retreat. And I went to the writer's retreat, obviously, to keep learning about how to write books and meet people and whatever. And Whitney Moran, who's the senior editor at Nimbus, was there. So she first heard about this project there. I mean, that's just being in the right place at the right time. And one of the classes she gave during that weekend retreat was on how to submit your work to a publisher. So I had it all there. And plus, on the Saturday night or Sunday night of the retreat, we were able to read from our stories. And so she was in the audience, and so I read it. So and I spoke to her, and she certainly said that she was interested in the project. So when I submitted it the next year, she certainly was interested in publishing it.
Great. I'm assuming that you loved Anne of Green Gables, and I'm wondering which was your favorite book in the series?
Okay, true confession time. I might have read Anne of Green Gables as part of schoolwork. I don't remember much more than that. What I do remember is my husband and I, at the time when our boys were like 3 and 5 or really little, we went over to Prince Edward Island for a vacation. And for the very first time, I saw the stage play of Anne of Green Gables. And even then, and maybe it's because I was a mother and I was an adult and not a young girl, it wasn't Anne who appealed to me so much. It really was Marilla. I liked Marilla even then. I wanted to know more about her. I wanted to know, well, yeah, like at the age of 52, she's taking on a new child. That's a big thing. Anyway, both of my boys sat through that, watched the whole thing. there's a scene in it, for those who've seen the stage play, there's a scene in it, of course, where Matthew dies. And every time the curtains came down, of course, everyone was clapping and my boys would get into it. And I thought, how am I going to tell them, don't clap, because this is going to be a sad scene. And when the curtain comes down, nobody's going to clap. And look, they never moved. They never, not a peep out of them. They were so caught up in the scene, right, of that. So really, that was my first introduction to it. I didn't read any of the others. I read Budge Wilson's story called Before Green Gables, and then went on to read the Anne of Green Gables book. And that's how I got sort of the background information on before writing the story.
In writing a book set in the mid-19th century, how much original research did you have to do? And how much did you rely on descriptions from Anne of Green Gables?
Boy, that's an interesting question. When I wrote my first novel, it hasn't been published yet, but I have a whole completed manuscript. And of course, it's my first. And they always say you kind of cut your teeth on that first manuscript. You learn everything you need to know about writing a book with your first manuscript. And I spent weeks doing research, weeks, and dug up all kinds of information. For that story is set in 1917 during the Halifax explosion. So lots of information. And I didn't use half it. I swear I didn't use half it. So this time I basically followed the characters, and whatever the characters went to do or what they said, like for instance, what was his name, Rachel's husband, Thomas, I had said that he graduated from veterinary college. I mean, that just came out of the character. Okay, he graduated from the veterinarian college. Now I went on the computer and looked up, was there even a veterinarian school in Charlottetown at that time? And there was. So I sort of followed the characters, and if they did something or went somewhere on a ferry, on a train, I just made sure afterwards that I validated that experience, and it could really happen. So there really was a train going from Halifax to Truro. As a matter of fact, on the year that I wrote that event happened, it was the first train that actually went from Halifax to Truro. So I was lucky in that whatever the characters did, I was able to validate. And other than that, I just, the language of my father and my mother and people on the Eastern Shore of Nova Scotia, it's not much different than I say the mid 1800s or whatever. So the language came easy, how people spoke. We live, on this side of the country. We're very close to Cape Breton and Newfoundland. And so we have all those different dialects that have really stayed the same throughout the last 100 years. So I just drew upon what I really knew.
Okay. Which character in the book was the most fun to write, and which character was the hardest?
I really liked, as a fun character, she's not significant, but as a fun character, I really liked Violet. Violet showed up, and here's Matthew now. We discover that he had this woman who really cared for him and loved him, and he loved her. And really, I wrote, I think, the first backstory of Matthew's life and why he was the way he was. And I loved Violet. And if anyone wanted to write a story from my story, they could take Violet out of it and tell her story. But I think hers would have been lovely and sad and all kinds of things. So yeah, Violet was fun for me. In that, because of her, we had interaction with Matthew, with him blushing, with him being honest about his feelings. And so, yeah, I liked her. Difficult character for me, I guess, would have been Nora, would have been Marilla's mother. Certainly in terms of her own grief and her sorrow and her regrets and all of those things, that was deep in me. Like there was a lot of my own feelings in that as a mother, all of that. So it was difficult to really, I didn't want to be too mean. I didn't want to make her out to be such a really bad person. I wanted her to be seen as a victim as well of her circumstances, of loving a man that didn't ever love her back, a man who then, when she had the baby girl, thought this is great, really became jealous, and she became jealous of the baby. And so yeah, I hope. And at the end, I loved it when she, of course it's terrible, but when she's dying and all the people around her are able to make amends with each other. And I really liked that. But yeah, that was tough for me.
Matthew Cuthbert and Rachel Lynde obviously played big roles in the Anne books, and John Blythe and Thomas Lynde played lesser roles. Were there any other characters from the Anne book that you used in Marilla Before Anne?
No, I used all of the characters that existed, like Rachel and her husband, and those are people that were in the Anne of Green Gables book. I created Violet. I created Marilla's, love interest. I created the orphanage scene and those people. But other than that, I used the names. I guess I would have made Etta and Martha were new, the two women, her Aunt Martha, right, and Etta as well. And that story I love as well. So no, I used the ones that existed, and then I just made up ones that helped me tell the story.
Great. Did you read Sarah McCoy's Marilla of Green Gables that came out in 2019? And if so, what was your take on it, as there are a number of different interpretations between your book and hers?
Yeah. Just give me a second, Aunt. Okay, good. My husband got the phone. I did read her book. I have to tell you that it was in the winter of 2019, in about February, March. And I'm in the middle of writing the story about Marilla, having done the research in the fall, discovering nobody really had written about her. And so I thought, oh, yay, great, I've got the story. And I'm sitting in bed, and the Google feed comes up, and I see a news story about this lady named Sarah McCoy who wrote a book called like Marilla of Green Gables. Well, I nearly had heart failure. I thought, well, it's done. It's already done. Oh my God, I was so upset. But anyway, I kept going, but I did go get it because I want to read what her story was. And some of you may have read it. And I mean, she did amazing research, and she brought a story to life that it gave me more information about the Underground Railroad and how it intersected with Canada. And having Marilla go to Ontario, this is what the story is about. Marilla goes to Ontario to stay with an aunt that lives up there and gets involved in the Underground Railroad. So in that way, as an educational piece, it's a really interesting book. I didn't learn anything more about Marilla, and she only takes Marilla up to about the age of 17 or 18. She's young. My book takes Marilla beyond that. And actually her book was young adult, and my book is labeled as an adult book. So yeah, it was a good read, but it doesn't really matter. That's like another story, and you can read it on its own, or take this one and read it on its own. Again, it's fiction.
Great. One reader wrote, one thing that bothered me in the book was that I couldn't figure out why Marilla was so unwilling to talk to William about the baby after she gave it up, when she goes and meets up with him afterward.
I know.
She couldn't raise the baby alone at 17. So it really wasn't her fault. If she loved him and he loved her, then he should see that she didn't have a choice.
I struggled with that. I did. But my sense is that he would have been absolutely heartbroken to find out that even though she thought he had died. I was thinking from his perspective, he'd think the one connection you'd have with that love would be our child. And the thought that she gave it away, even knowing that, yes, the circumstances didn't allow for her to raise a child, although she could have. I just think that she didn't want to break his heart, and she didn't want to live with a lie. She just thought, I can't live with this knowing I've done this, but I can't tell him because it's going to break his heart.
Fiction inspired by other earlier works of fiction comes with a built-in audience. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that?
Yeah, I think I talked about that earlier. It's an advantage from a publisher's point of view, and it's an advantage from an author's point of view in that now, if I write another book and I send it into publishers, now they can say, this is the author of so-and-so book. So it gets me known in a way by a body of work that an audience already knows. So my book has done really well. It has sold well. It was on the number, there's the top 5 books that are listed every month around the provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland. And over on PEI, last summer and this summer, my book was in the top 5 in terms of sales. So it has a built-in audience, and that really is the advantage. For me, it's an advantage because I'm old getting into this, and I thought, I want to get published. If I want to do this, I want to get published. And I thought I'm not going to be in this long enough to get known. I need to come out of the gate with something that can sell well. And if I want to do another book, then I'll be able to do that. I said I was going to write between 60 and 70, so I've got 2 more years to go. So I want to get the second one out.
And is there a disadvantage to writing about somebody who already has an audience? Have you had any negative feedback about the way you envisioned Marilla?
Absolutely. The whole time I was writing it, I knew that it was going to be controversial. I mean, I think one of the publishers in Ontario I had sent it to at that time had said, you've basically taken this story and you've turned it on its head. And this publisher said, I'm just too married to the original story to want to veer from it. So, there is there is going to be controversy, and people are going to be upset that I created this life for Marilla. But controversy can be good in terms of selling books or anything. You can have people really hate it and then tell other people they hate it, and other people go buy it because they want to know why she hated it, and it goes on and on. So I thought it's just, it was risky in that way, but I certainly had much more positive feedback than I did negative.
Great. I know you started writing after you retired. Had you always wanted to be an author, or was there something in your life that suggested that this was the correct course for you to take?
I always wrote, meaning I wrote in journals, as a woman, we all keep journals. The journal of my life, everything I've gone through. I had a box full of journals, and I wrote some poetry, but really just nothing that anybody else would read or I'd want them to read, really. And so I knew I could write. And my family has always encouraged me to write because they felt that I could from the few things that I did. But I had an idea for a story, and it was the idea of the story. And it was the first one, not this book, but the first one I did, that really prompted me to try to write the story. I read my first novel at the age of 13. Honest to God, I read my first novel. It was called The Godfather. You guys would know The Godfather by Marilla Puzo. And I just never stopped reading after that. I love reading. And I've read so many books. The whole alphabet series, except Zed. Anyone into Sue Grafton? Poor Sue. She did the alphabet series, and then she died before she did Zed. Anyway, so yeah, I read a lot of books. And when I retired, I thought, well, I don't want to just read. I want to do something. I think I want to write. And I just thought, I'm just going to try this. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the education for it. I don't have, I didn't think I had any skills for it, but I had a story and I wanted to write the story down. So that was my first manuscript that I did. And that's the one where I learned a lot about how to do it. And so my second one was this manuscript for Marilla. I thought was better, and it was, but the editor sent me 17 pages of edits. Like, 17 pages. So there was still a lot of work to be done, even though I thought it was finished.
Did you have a writing group that you passed the novel by to get comments on?
Yes, I did. And that's where I wrote a chapter a week, because we met every Wednesday morning and I wanted to read a new chapter. And then I'd get their feedback and then put that on the pile and get to the next chapter. And I always had a chapter every week that I did for that group. Some people don't like to read their work. They hold it really close and don't want to share it. They're concerned. And oh my God, I love reading. I love reading things that I write. If it wasn't for my sister listening to all of it, I don't know what I would have done. So between having a writers group and people that read and being willing to read it, I got a lot of feedback and it was really helpful.
Great. One of the books that we had talked to you and I together about was Before Green Gables by Budge Wilson. How much did this book influence what you wrote about Anne, or did it have any influence?
It didn't have any influence, but it gave me the story of Bertha, because it was Budge Wilson that created that. Now, she was commissioned by the Ellen Montgomery Incorporated to write that book. And really, Budge wrote that, I think at the age of 85 or something, 80 or 85. She was much older than I was in writing, but she'd been writing young adult books all of her life. And so I read it, and so I had those characters. I had that basic story of where Anne was born into and what had happened. If you go to the Anne of Green Gables book, there's like one page. Marilla and Anne are kind of clomping along in a wagon, and she says, "Tell me about your family." And she just gets this brief little thing about her mom and dad dying, and they lived in a little yellow house, and her mother was a teacher. But then Budge took it and really expanded on that story. So I just kind of wove my story through that.
Why did you decide to have Anne write to Marilla from the orphanage? Since she knew Marilla's name and address, wouldn't she have known them when she arrived?
Sorry. So when Anne was in the orphanage,
She wrote Marilla.
she did, because she found Marilla's name in among some other letters of her mother's.
Right.
So she thought her mother was going to mail this letter to this lady named Marilla. So I'm going to write her. Maybe she knew my mother. So she writes her, and that it makes connection with Marilla.
Yeah, so when she arrived, she would have known Marilla already?
When she arrives at the farm?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She would have known her.
Great. The voice of the novel seems very similar to the writing of Lucy Maud Montgomery. Was that something that you did on purpose, or was it just a happy circumstance?
That's so strange, and it really is. When I was writing my first manuscript and running it through my writers group, there were several people in that group that said, "God, you're writing." I mean, some of this writing I did down in the States. My husband and I go to Florida, so in the winter. So some of this was down in Florida, and the people were saying, it's so authentically Canadian. It sounds just like, like something that Lucy Maud Montgomery would write. It's like the Anne of Green Gables. Everything about it, the farmhouse on the Prince Edward Island, everything sounded so Canadian to them that I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm just writing as I remember, or as I've never heard it, but as I imagined they would have talked. So they really encouraged me to do that. And I guess in some ways inspired me that maybe I can write in that genre. Maybe I can do that.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about your next book that you're working on?
Yes.
Or is it secret?
It's the first one. So I dug out the manuscript because, this Marilla has taken me the last couple of years between doing the edits and getting it out and doing the promoting and marketing and going and doing book signings and everything. So it kept me busy. It's dying down a little bit. And so now I've got time to go back and dig out that manuscript. So The original manuscript is an absolute love story set between Halifax and Boston. And it's the story of that took place, the beginning of it happened during the Halifax explosion. This young family, this husband and wife and their baby, all get separated, and it's assumed that they're all dead. This story weaves so during the chaos of the explosion, so many people did lose contact with people, and they never saw them again. They were never found, bodies were never found. So it's that story. The idea for it came from, there's a highway that we drive down here called the Bedford Highway, and it's right on the ocean. And there's a retail store, and it's a monuments place. So they have headstones and whatever. And I'm driving by one day, and there was a headstone right in the showroom that I could see, and it had someone's name on it, like Joe Smith, whatever. But I thought, what would it be like if you saw your name on a headstone and it gave your date of birth, which was your date of birth, and it gave the date of death as having happened, and you're seeing this headstone, but you're still here. I know, crazy idea, but that was the beginning of that story. So this is what happens. There's a young woman comes from Boston who was raised in Boston. She comes to visit Halifax, and she sees a headstone with her name on it. So now she knows there's more behind her story than just that she grew up in Boston. She actually has connections in Halifax. So I told too much. You won't even want to read it. So that's the story, and I hope to have it finished by the end of March next year and be able to submit it by April, which means if it did get accepted right away, it'd still be 2 years before it would be on the shelf. It's called Out of the Ashes, which is this couple, literally come out of the ashes and discover that they are all still alive. And so that's the title. Now they may change it, but from now, that's my working title.
Obviously, from down east gives you greater insight into the life that Anne and Marilla and Matthew would have led. Have you been to Green Gables, and was that helpful in writing the book?
Yes, I have been to Green Gables. I was there, and it does help to be on the East Coast, even in terms of language and customs and some historical things. I think it is very helpful. And yeah, so I was to Green Gables, visited, took my children over to visit, did the whole thing. Now, in the story itself, when I'm describing the farmhouse, I'm not copying the house that is in Prince Edward Island, which was Maud Montgomery's grandparents' house. I'm not copying that in the story. Everybody in their mind as a reader has some image of a farmhouse. So I just let everybody have their own image of that. What a window would look like over the sink, or what porch would look like with pegs on it with hooks. It's not an exact replica of the building that people consider part of the story. I just left that to everyone's imagination.
What advice would you give to someone who wanted to do what you did and start writing after they retire?
You have to join a writer's group. So I'm being serious now. Every new writer should belong to a writer's group. So in Nova Scotia, it's called the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia. There's a Writers Federation of New Brunswick. And so I'm sure that provinces across the country have writers organizations, and you register, and then you receive all kinds of information on courses taking place, workshops, all of that. So it is really a good resource to have. And join a writer's group so that you have feedback on what you're writing, so that you get some idea of how you're doing in terms of your writing. Find someone that you can read to on a regular basis to run your material by is always helpful. And don't edit at the beginning. I see authors getting stuck on the first chapter because they keep editing it, and then they lose the whole train of the story. You have to write it complete and then go back to the beginning, because things will change. like the relationship between Etta and Martha. I mean, that was so organic. I didn't know that they were going to be a couple. I didn't know that's how it was going to end. I just wrote it and it evolved. And then when I realized they were actually a couple and shared this lovely relationship, I actually had to go back to the beginning and add a few things for the reader to kind of get an idea. Oh, I wonder if they are. And so, you know, when you go back to edit, you're editing based on everything that's written, not just the first or second chapter. So really the editing has to go at the end. And just the advice is that you can do it. You absolutely can do it. The skills of writing can be learned, but if you're a storyteller, anyone can tell a story.
Great. I had something that I wanted to ask you, and now I can't remember what it was. Do you have a favorite passage that you'd like to read?
Oh, I do. I'll have to find it, but yeah, as soon as you say that, I can think of it. Sorry, guys, this is holding you up.
Well, it was like something I hadn't asked you before.
Yeah. It's basically the scene where Marilla arrives at the train station in Truro with the idea that she's now going to reveal the truth to her daughter Bertha and meet her new granddaughter Anne, and then finds out that they had died of smallpox, which is what Budge Wilson had created in her book. So I kept it the same. And she lunged at him. She just lunged at him and said, "Where's the baby? Where is the baby?" And to find out that the baby had simply been taken by the original housekeeper or whatever, and off she went. And that moment for me was, in even reading it and writing it, was powerful.
Yeah, that was a powerful scene. I think that's all the questions that I have. Maya, do we want to open it up to the audience to ask some questions?
Yeah, I just want to say, Louise.
I can't see your face, Maya. Where
Yeah,
are you?
it's okay. I'm gonna spotlight myself. just a
Okay.
second.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I just want to say that your honesty, the way you've allowed us tonight to enter into what it means to be a humble writer, to be courageous enough to write a chapter a week, all of that has been really important for us tonight. But I do not want you to leave here tonight without knowing that the work that you've created of taking a character from a story that people have loved and valued and writing an even better story that made us cry and made us laugh and made us fall in love and made us understand those characters even more. That is like this story, like to hear you talk about how it's been given to you.
Yeah.
Is really like that's a gift. And I could feel that as I read that novel, this novel. I could feel it so much. I had to send it to one of my best friends from high school, who I think is on tonight. So I just hope as you move into other stories that that you've shared with us the experience of when you really listen to what your heart has been given, because they say where your deepest part of your heart meets the need of the world. And we didn't even know we needed this story until you wrote it.
Oh, that's so lovely.
I'm going to open it up to the chat, but I just really need you to hear that.
Thank you.
Specifically for me, but I hope you hold it. So, okay, anybody can chat. So if you have questions, Anne should be able to see that now. It's open.
So you're just opening the chat rather than letting people ask questions themselves?
Oh yeah, they could. Now I have to see. Good question. You have to put your hand up, or Yeah,
Well, actually, if they just unmute themselves, they can do that, right?
they can. So,
And ask the question.
yeah, go for it. Let's try that. Yeah, people can unmute themselves. You'd think I was new to this. So if you're sitting on a question, friends, now this is your moment. You've got Louise just for a few more minutes. So
Maybe I'll be able to remember the one that
And be honest. I mean, this book is not for everybody. So if there were things you didn't like about it, you can tell me. It's okay.
Well, I want to make a comment and I'll ask a question because I read all like 36 Anne books 12 times and I started reading them when I was 8.
gee.
So it was a very big part of my life and very beginning of my reading. So like you were saying, the beginning of your reading. So I read it last week. I was on a train to Montreal and I read the whole thing in like 5 hours. And I was like completely freaked out. I loved it and I think it was amazing, but it was so sad that I was like kind of freaked out and didn't want to finish it because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so sad. And how is this going to come back together? So I loved it. But it really, really, for someone who was massively into the stories, it was like really hard to read about Marilla's life being so hard and her having to make all those horrifically hard choices because of who she was and what happened to her. So I just wanted to say that. But
Oh,
it
Shelley,
was
thank you so
amazing.
much.
Amazing.
Thank you.
well, one thing, if you look into Lucy Maud Montgomery's story, it was very sad too. There was a lot of unhappy things that happened to her in her life. So when you know about things like that, that gives you insight into some of the sad things that happened to Anne, because Anne's life certainly wasn't. I mean, there was lots of stuff in Anne of Green Gables that you laughed at, but certainly she had lots of sad things in her background.
Yeah, and I think Maud created Anne to live a life she wished she'd lived through her, because Maud's life was very difficult. Living with her grandparents, her mother had died, her father abandoned her. So I think she spent a lot of time very sad and depressed, and I think she gave this little character life that she wished maybe she had.
Mhm.
well, and Louise, before Joan asked her question, as you were picturing the stage play, for many of us, it's Megan Follows and picturing the Marilla from the movie. And I think, Shelley, that sadness really does connect with that character that I was picturing as I was reading. So, okay, Joan, what do you got?
I wasn't really going to ask a question, but I wanted to comment on the fact that it answered so many questions for me after I played Marilla. And
You played Marilla?
Yes, but not at Charlottetown. My
but
son was in it
I wish
a
I
number
could
of
hug
times.
you. Can I just hug you virtually? Oh, you would have been a Marilla. Tell me about it.
So I loved the fact that I never thought about Anne being her biological daughter, but I myself had to make up a story of why she was the way she was and how I played her.
Right.
So I really was intrigued. I never even thought, I mean, you're starting with the fact that you figured it was her daughter. I never even thought of that.
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter, right.
Granddaughter, yeah.
But I never crossed my mind at all. But anyway, it was the most moving character I've ever played. And I could not sing the song, I can't find the words, without bawling every night. It was she's such a moving character, and I'm very thankful that you wrote it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for letting me know that. That's wonderful. Thank you. So if my book ever becomes a stage play, you could play her.
Getting a little old, yeah.
Thanks, Joan. Anybody else
Thank you, Joan.
want to unmute or put in the chat?
I was just going to say, this is Brenda speaking. I was just going to say can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just can't.
I was just thinking throughout the whole time I was reading it, is, how patient we need to be with people and how understanding we need to be, because we don't know people's backstory, right?
No. Yeah.
And I just thought of how we felt about Marilla and her roughness around the edges, and I thought everybody's got a story, and we don't know what that is, right? So
Right.
that, anyway, that just kept coming to me, because we say somebody, oh, their bark's worse than their bite. Well, there's a reason why they even got a bark. So I just thought that was beautiful to have that sort of shared with us, why she might have been the person she was.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, friends, been a full evening of good questions. Always makes us want to read the book again. Does anybody else have anything you want to put?
Lynn Manning wrote something. I didn't catch the very end of it, but what she said is it's always interesting to know what authors read themselves. So what books have you found interesting or engaging lately?
Oh, wow. So many. So many. I've been really focusing on reading, of course, more Atlantic Canadian writers. And so, Carol Bruneau, Donna Morrissey. Oh, there's so many. I've got a whole bookcase full of them. And I read everything. It doesn't matter whether it's, a detective, current sort of detective story, historical fiction. I don't like books like Sandra Brown, romance, a lot of sex. I'm at the age, I'm like, okay, I know that. Let's keep going on to something else. I don't need the actual details of so much of that. So those are for younger audiences. I tend to want to have something that is more mature, that, has a story to it that I guess I can relate to at this age. One of the new authors I discovered, her name is Maureen Hoover. I discovered her as an author. I don't think she's even Canadian, but yeah, a couple of her books were just outstanding. So yeah. And other than that, everything. The book I'm reading right now is, have any of you heard of the book called The Birth House by Amy McKay?
Yes.
Amy McKay lives in Nova Scotia. And I just got her book today because I'm part of a book club as well. And I have the book today about her story of telling about her family has a genetic predisposition to cancer. And so she writes that story. So, I like autobiographical, I like memoirs, I love, whatever it is. I just read all the time. I don't read when I'm writing. That's the sad part. I can't. But when I'm reading, I'm reading all the time. I mean, I went through the Danielle Steele time, right? Did that. You mature, you read things different.
That's right.
So people who know me know that I love audiobooks because I seem to have a lot of jobs that I have to do that don't really require me to think about them. So I can listen and do whatever it is. Do you like audiobooks? And have you thought of getting your books released in audiobook format?
I have. I've never listened to audiobooks. I haven't. I've listened to tapes that are, I used to put them in the car or a CD, and they might have been more inspirational, self-help, spiritual things. I might have listened to that sort of, tape or whatever, but not books. And I did ask that if they were going to make it into a book, could I read it? I'd love to be able to read it. And they said that they would need to hire an actual actor under the Actors Union in Canada to be able to do that. So I've had no word at this point whether or not that's going to happen.
Okay.
That's interesting, because I've listened to 2 audiobooks now where I thought the reading was really poor. So I think you'd be way better at reading your own book than some of the actors out there.
Well, yeah,
I think so.
now, the author that I mentioned, Donna Morrissey is from Newfoundland, one of the most beautiful women and a character. And she wrote her memoir called Pluck, P-L-U-C-K. And it was turned into an audiobook, and she's reading it because she's got the authentic Newfoundland accent that just gives the book its life.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, you've got 51 votes to fight that fight, Louise, to read your own book. Maybe you have to become an actress in the next decade, because it sounds like this last 8 years of writing, you're inspiring all of us to
Oh,
think about
thank
what
you.
goal we might want to set for ourselves and what we're being called to. So,
Right.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
I think. Do people want to put gratitudes? There's some encouragement to read some Anne books. Louise has her finger up.
I just do. There's a lady I'm seeing named Linda.
Oh yeah, I'll try.
Linda.
Yeah,
So
Linda.
Linda, if I can look like you with the gray hair, like I will take that any day.
Yeah, it's
You're absolutely beautiful. And I just want to say that because a lot of women, as we get older, just think it doesn't matter. And you inspire me that
right.
we know it matters, because it keeps us confident and it keeps us connected to our womanhood. And I think that's important to whatever age. So thank you for looking so nice.
And so we bless you, Louise. We bless you into the creating and finishing of your next book. We bless you into the ways that telling this story will inspire other people to write, and also to remember, kind of in this season of remembering, to remember what it means to fall in love with characters and have the experience of imagining or dreaming the other parts that aren't written and yet are on our hearts. So we bless you and give thanks for that tonight, for your
And
time.
thank you. Beautifully said. Thank you.